He's caught after 11 years on the run.
I feel like I'm the person to explain things.
Can detectives finally get her to confess to murdering her own husband?
Her belief was she just got away with murder.
But first, a young mother vanishes into the night.
Where's she at now?
I need you to give me something to go on. I can't give you nothing.
We've been talking for 3 minutes and he's already lied.
Investigators searching for answers in the interrogation room.
The longer this goes on and we don't find her, the worse this gets for you.
Please call on 911. Where is your emergency?
It's like a non-emergency. We want to report a missing person. Report what? A missing person. It's my sister.
How old is she?
She's 25.
And what is her name?
Samira Watkins.
Where was the last place you saw her?
The last place I seen her was Thursday night around 8 o'clock.
All right, we'll get an officer over there to you.
Samira Watkins' sister reported her missing and made it very clear that it was highly unusual for her to go several days without talking to anybody.
Sometimes people just get up and leave. But that wasn't the case with her personality. Samira Watkins was a parent, and she had a job.
Samira's family said that she was a student, a hard worker, a young mother.
She was doing her best to do well for herself. She was in college. She was seeking a career in the dental field.
She was just a beautiful young girl with her future ahead of her. This wasn't a girl that would typically just go off the radar without talking to her family, without going to work, without reporting to school.
Those facts definitely gave me reason to be very concerned that this could actually be more than just a missing person.
Samira's sister said that the night Samira went missing, Samira worked a shift at her job. She went home. She changed her clothes. She let her sister know that she was going over to talk to her boyfriend, Zachary Littleton, and that she would be home later that night. She was never seen or heard from again.
So it just made sense to go ahead and talk to Zachary Littleton as quickly as possible to see whether or not Samira had actually made it to his apartment. He could very well be the last person that had seen her.
You'll have a seat here. I'll be right back, okay?
Zachary Littleton was a 24-year-old member of the United States Navy. He was stationed here in Pensacola at Pensacola Naval Air Station, and Littleton was Samira's boyfriend. My goals of this first interview were to find Samira. A missing person, you want to resolve that as soon as you can. The longer that goes, the more unlikely it is that that's going to end well. A secondary goal was to lock Zachary Littleton into a statement.
So that later on, should we discover evidence that's in direct confrontation with the statement that he gave earlier, maybe he'll break or change his story.
What's your full God-given birth name?
Zachary Antoine Littleton.
What's your address?
I was staying at 3500 Crane Road at the apartment, but I moved the last 2 days. Because my wife and my daughter, they'll be here in Friday, the 6th. She was stationed in Goose Creek, and I'm stationed here, so the Navy decided to put us together, so we...
Oh, so you're both in the Navy?
Right.
Where's Goose Creek?
South Carolina.
So y'all finally get to be together. Cool. That's really good.
We learned Zachary Littleton was married to an enlisted Navy sailor who lived out of town and was caring for their child.
Littleton was a bit of a playboy. That's easily an indicator of somebody that's flat out a liar and who probably will lie about other things.
So you know the reason why you're here, we had that discussion over the phone.
Yeah, about Sammy going missing.
You know her as Sammy?
Yeah.
Okay. But you've had some dealings with her, and you've talked to her.
Yeah, she's been over to the house like maybe 4 or 5 times. We'll chill, kick it or whatever, but, you know, it wasn't nothing really a relationship. It was just friends. That's what I thought it was.
So you've known her for how long then?
It's a few months, not a whole year. It's been a few months.
Did your wife know that you were talking to this girl?
No.
Okay. Would that be a problem if she knew that?
No, because she knew I have a lot of friends.
Did you have any kind of a relationship with Sammy that was more than just friends?
No.
I want you to know that I'm not the military. I don't have any intention of telling anybody else anything that is said in this room. I want to make that clear so that I want you to feel free to tell me everything without you worrying about getting in trouble from your wife or getting in trouble at work.
The military does not look fondly upon members committing adultery.
You can be demoted in rank, or you could actually be discharged from the military for having an adulterous relationship.
So I thought that maybe he was lying because of that. But it could also be because he's lying to avoid getting in trouble for what we're investigating.
I understand that we're looking into this case, and I really need to know the exact extent of y'all's relationship.
Okay, we had sex once or twice.
Okay.
It wasn't no every time we saw each other, because she only been over like, maybe, like I say, 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
It certainly is a strike against him early on. I mean, we've been talking for 3 minutes at this point, and he's already lied. Most people aren't going to lie about things unless they've done something wrong.
I need you to tell me exactly when you saw her last.
Wednesday.
Definitely Wednesday.
Yeah. Wednesday, somebody dropped off. So I was like, why you coming just popping up in my house like that? And I was like, you know what? You need to leave.
All right,
and
so
then she was getting like attached, so I just told her, I'm married. I got a daughter, so why should it? It was good while it lasted, and you knew it from the gate. You knew it from the beginning that you weren't gonna be the woman in my life, and that's when I took her home.
Have you seen her at any time since when you dropped her off?
No, I haven't.
But it's definitely Wednesday?
Yeah.
My first thought was maybe he had his days mixed up. Samira's sister told us that when she last saw Samira, Thursday night, Samira was leaving to go meet with Zachary Littleton at his apartment. But I really nailed that point down. Now he's actually saying, no, I didn't even see her at all on Thursday. I saw her the night before.
So we're trying to paint the person in corners and then see if they're going to give us something where we can kick the door open and confront them with the actual crime that we're investigating.
Does it strike you as odd that we're here talking about her?
It struck me, yeah, because now she's missing. And excuse me, but it messes me up.
How does it mess you up?
Because how is that possible? I mean, I didn't do it. Anything, I'm not responsible for her being missing. I hate it for her because she was a nice person. She wasn't no feisty type or no. She had good tendencies to be a good woman.
There was a period during the interview where Zachary Littleton would refer to Samira in the past tense. She was this, or she was that. That struck me as odd. At this point, she is missing, but she could be any number of places and be perfectly fine.
All right, I can tell you're ready to go.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm ready to get you out of here.
I ended the first interview with Littleton because I was trying to maintain the ability to have him come back for a second interview later on in the investigation. Littleton had definitely not relieved my suspicions of him, nor did he lead me to where she was at. And as he left, I felt like he very well could be responsible for Samira's disappearance.
Before Watkins went missing on October 29th, she told her mother she was going to her boyfriend's apartment to talk to him.
Nobody saw or heard from her after. Samira's sister, April Joseph, says Samira only knew the man for a few months. Family members say the man is a married sailor.
If we were going to find Samira alive, we really needed to find something out very soon. Even if she was just somewhere hiding, getting some kind of information could help us to find her.
We learned Samira Watkins had recently become pregnant.
Samira's family made it very clear that Littleton definitely knew she was pregnant and that the baby was his.
Her family said that Zachary Littleton was not happy about this information.
Zachary Littleton was so against her pregnancy that he encouraged her to get an abortion. On the night that Samira went missing, Samira's phone had pinged a tower right in the area of Littleton's apartment. Zachary Littleton told me in this initial interview he never saw her that night. We were beginning to see more vividly that Littleton was very likely to be responsible for whatever happened to Samira.
I'll be right back.
We decided to ramp up our approach a little bit. This interview was not as laid back as the first. We still did not know where Samira was, if she was alive, dead. We really hoped we'd get some answers.
It's Detective Harnett. What's going on, man? Still good, still good.
We're seeing if we couldn't get him to either add information, break completely, or to set traps for later understanding in the investigative process.
We're going to talk about what's going on and hope that we can maybe try and figure some stuff out.
Okay.
What do you think happened with her?
In what aspect?
I mean, where's she at now? Okay, what do you think, though? I understand that, but I mean, what do you think? What do you think?
I don't know what to think.
You need to.
Yeah.
You need to.
I need to?
Yeah. You need to. You need to think real hard about the different possibilities. What are the possibilities that you come up with in your own head?
I ain't really thought about it like that.
Yeah, you have.
No, I ain't.
That's totally unnatural. Anybody in this situation who was innocent, they're going to be racking their brain thinking about what happened to this person, and now it's a matter of challenging and see if he'll come off of that story.
I need you to rack your brain. Okay, I'm hoping that maybe you can tell us some places that we might go look based on your conversation with her, because if we find her, we can resolve the whole issue, right? So.
And me standing up and raising my voice and projecting it a little bit more, it's testing to see if they're susceptible to a person showing dominance over them.
I mean, maybe something happened to her en route.
Okay.
Maybe she did tell people she was on the way to my house.
What sort of thing would possibly happen to her while she was en route?
A carjacking, I don't know, rape. She probably stopped, went somewhere else, and didn't make it to my house. I don't know.
At this point, the main thing that concerned me was his avoidance of the pregnancy issue. He has to realize that him being the father of her unborn child puts him pretty high on the motive list, and I wanted to talk about it.
It's a matter of trying to present new stresses to see what he might be susceptible to in the hopes of you breaking new information loose.
You acknowledge that she's pregnant, right?
She said she was.
At some point, she has to drop a bomb on you that she thinks it's your kid.
Right. I mean, that's
when did that happen?
She never told me it was my kid.
I'm not buying that for her.
All right.
What did she actually say?
I mean, she just asked, she just told me, she said, I'm going to need some help with this baby. And I was like, well, I can't help you. You know, I don't have the room in my finances.
What sort of help did she ask for?
Pampers and baby wipes and food. You never just actually said it was your baby. It's your baby's that. She never said that.
Why would she expect you to buy the supplies then?
I don't know.
So we're almost in a debate, and we're seeing if we can use the intelligent side of the debate to get him to change his mind. And it's another strategy that we'll employ to try and get someone to change their story.
I think ultimately the issue is that you just don't want to be involved because it's messy.
Yeah, it's messy.
Okay, it's messy. It's not good. Okay, there's no wonderful sunshine and rainbow at the end of this.
On the morning of November 3rd, some jet skiers found a large duffel bag that was washed up on shore of a waterway very close to Pensacola Naval Air Station. The bag had a foul odor coming from it. There was insect activity on and around it, and there was even blood that was seeping out of the bag. When the sheriff's office got there and they opened it up, they did find a body of a female inside of that bag, deceased.
She had no clothing on except a bra, and she was curled up in the fetal position inside of the duffel bag.
The other portion of it was that her face was taped up, which is also a behavior that someone who has a relationship with a victim will do to hide their face, almost as if to hide the shame of what took place.
A latent fingerprint examiner was able to conduct a fingerprint comparison on site, and they were able to report that indeed this was Samira Watkins. We later learned that cause of death was asphyxiation, most likely a strangulation. It completely changed the whole look of the investigation. It was now a homicide, and Littleton was our main suspect.
When we opened the bag, there's a few things that we learned. First and foremost, she was missing an earring.
When Samira went missing, we knew that she had been wearing both earrings because we obtained the video surveillance from her employer.
Finding that second earring would be so important. If I found it in the possession of an individual, they would certainly be potentially the killer. There was also a couple of paper towels in the bag. You could clearly see that it had a distinct pattern on it. It was more or less pulled up into the driveway and just abandoned.
So we started pulling video footage from the area. We found a local restaurant where we found footage of Littleton walking in the night that she ultimately disappeared.
It puts him in the area where her car was dumped.
He made mistakes. He made big mistakes.
During that search, we found some key pieces of evidence. We did find a roll of paper towels that matched exactly the print of the paper towel found inside the bag with Samira. But the biggest thing found at Littleton's house was that matching earring, the earring we'd been looking for.
That was a direct link between the victim, the scene and the suspect.
Any doubt that I had, which wasn't much, was now eliminated. I knew that Zachary Littleton was our killer. Littleton's arrest took place at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. It was a really good feeling to know that this was going to be a case that we did resolve, and it wouldn't be one that would be hanging out as a cold case down the line.
I believe the night Samira Watkins went missing, she drove over to Zachary Littleton's apartment. At some point while she was there, he strangled her to death. He placed her body inside of the duffel bag. He drove her to the Naval Air Station. He threw her body in the water. He thought that he had gotten away with it. But then law enforcement was so quickly in touch with him, and that's why he started telling the lies that he did. My job prosecuting the case would have been much more difficult without the 2 interrogations, because the jurors would not have gotten to see Zachary Littleton's cold demeanor, his lack of concern for Samira, and the fact that he was lying in both interviews.
I don't know what to think.
You need to.
Yeah.
You need to.
I need to?
Yeah.
Zachary Littleton was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justice was served.
This was such a tragic case and involved a young mother and her unborn child, and because of that, there was this special sense of desire to do justice for them.
Carl didn't show up to work, which was not like him at all. He never missed work. So people started calling, and of course they called me. Do you know where he's at? I was like, no. One of his friends started calling around and ended up calling the police.
When the Newton Falls Police Department arrived on scene, they did not notice any signs of forced entry. Everything looked okay, and they eventually contacted Carl's parents, and they made entry to the house.
The officer that went in immediately smelled a terrible odor. The odor was, in his mind, a dead person.
And then they found my brother.
We found Carl located at the bottom of the stairway, covered in a tarp and a comforter with gunshot wounds.
How I found out was my oldest brother called me. Carl was a kind person, very patriotic, family-oriented person. Carl was in the military for roughly 25 years. He flew combat missions in Bosnia, and he flew missions over in the Middle East. And the C-130s, it's a big plane, it's kind of slow, so they're a target when they're up there, so it takes a special kind of pilot.
Everything we heard about him painted him as a good citizen, a contributing member of society, and a true victim.
From looking at the condition of the body, the estimate was he had been dead 2 or 3 days.
We discovered he had 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to the torso and 1 to the head. And the gunshot wound sustained to Carl's head was at close range.
It was obvious signs of foul play, instantly apparent. We were told that Claudia was originally from Brazil, that in the late 90s she moved to the U.S., became a naturalized U.S. citizen.
Carl met Claudia through Match.com, and he dated her for a couple months, and then for whatever reason, he decided to run off to Las Vegas and go get married. That was a little impulsive for him. 6 to 9 months into the marriage, he started expressing some concerns about being married to Claudia. He just said he wasn't happy with her and wanted to get away from her. I believe she was taking his money. That's what he believed. So he started talking to me about wanting to get divorced.
There were multiple efforts by the police and others to contact Claudia Harry. They could not connect with her.
Nobody really knew where she was, and so she was quickly a person of interest.
Investigators learned that Claudia had recently purchased a .357 Magnum at a local gun shop. We had also spoken to witnesses who told us that she had gone to a shooting range to practice shooting. Obviously, that raises some red flags.
It was very clear from the track of her phone that it was going to the Pittsburgh airport. From there, we found flight records that indicated she flew from Pittsburgh to New York, where she purchased a separate plane ticket to take her to Brazil. Within a matter of a couple months, we had Claudia located in Brazil. But based on Brazilian law and the Brazilian Constitution, they did not allow for their extradition of citizens to a foreign country, even if they're suspected of committing a crime such as homicide.
So the U.S. government, they just ran into a brick wall. Brazil just didn't want to cooperate. Claudia was just living freely, out in the open. Her belief was Brazil would never extradite her, so she just got away with murder. I was looking at a couple hours, almost every night, corresponding with the embassy. I just really wasn't willing to give up.
That family never let go to the idea that anybody could get away with killing their son, their brother. Our case was in the late 90s. Claudia becomes an American citizen. She signs her documents taking allegiance with the United States of America and denying her loyalty to Brazil. That got us in the door. I said, I don't want her Brazilian ass, I want her American ass.
It was a huge relief to get her back. It was like a big block off my shoulders.
out of the blue, just mid-flight, she says, "You know, a wife doesn't kill her husband without a good reason." It put those of us on the plane in a really tenuous or unique position. We don't know enough about the case to question her, but on the other hand, we have no legal obligation to make her stop talking. And she spent the next couple hours of this flight telling the story that she wanted to have heard. Although I didn't have the facts of the case, I was in the unique position of, having sat on that plane with her for so long that we had a rapport. My role was just to try to keep her comfortable, to keep her talking. If she doesn't give this statement to us in this room on the video, now it's her word against ours. I felt more pressure or stress than I have in any other case. Knowing the seriousness of the crime and the amount of effort that so many people put in for so many years, we felt like we can't screw this up.
She told these guys everything on the plane, but now that the cameras are rolling, this is what counts.
Now, it's my understanding from what I hear that while you were on the plane ride up here, you gave these guys a statement about what happened.
Yeah, partial.
Partial statement. Okay, great. But I kind of want to start at the beginning. I want to go back to March 15th, 2007.
Okay, you're gonna start from the end.
Well, the beginning of the end. Yes.
I start backwards. It's going to start backwards. It's not fair.
I think, in fairness, I think what you had already talked to Tony and I about on the plane, I think that would be a very good place to start.
I feel like I'm the person to explain things. I didn't feel that way on the plane.
Right, and you're not going to be under any pressure. I'm not going to talk to you any differently now than we did on the airplane. But it's scary.
She viewed me as the good guy in the interview. She felt comfortable with me. So really, the only role I could play is the one I played, and that was to reassure her and to keep her talking.
What I would like you to do, and this is entirely up to you, just talk about the things that you talked about with us before, the things that you were already comfortable with.
This is where I started wondering, is this going to happen or isn't it? Can't force anybody to make a statement. If they ask for a lawyer, the interview's over. If they choose not to talk anymore, that's their constitutional right. Whether or not this interview takes place is solely her discretion.
Bill,
I think what is important is the couple of things that you said that led up to what happened that day, because she was reading a lot of things in the news and she wants to fill in those blanks, the things that weren't correct. Is that fair? Is that kind of how all this thing started?
Yeah.
Okay.
To organize what point I was starting. As soon as we got married, but I didn't want to be married to him. All of a sudden, he was a different person. He scared the life out of me. He treated me very, very bad. He was like very aggressive with me. He beat me. It was torture. He tortured me.
During the interview, Claudia was claiming to be a battered wife, which we found no evidence of.
What she was saying didn't match what the detectives were hearing from any of his friends, family, former girlfriends. In those cases where you have that type of abuse, there is always some type of corroboration. In her case, there was zero.
You just got through the hardest part, okay? You're doing really well, and I think it's important. This is an important part of your story.
She needed to feel like she had somebody on her side, and it's difficult. You know the horrific thing they did, but you have to put that all aside and at least act like you're their friend, act like you believe them, because you want them to keep talking.
You really enlightened me when you were talking, and I really want him to hear that. I really want him to hear what you told me.
I was pregnant, and he got very, very angry, and he went crazy. He said, I never want to be a father. I never want to have children. I want a wife. I said, but I'm 4 years old. I can't. I'm not going to get an abortion. You will get an abortion.
One of the things that I noticed right away was how rehearsed everything she said seemed to be. There were a lot of statements that she made in the interview room that were just verbatim, just word for word what she had said on the plane. Even some of her hand movements. It was like she had been practicing this story, and that struck me as really odd.
After that, things start spiraling out of control, right?
Yeah. I had a plan. If he doesn't want to accept this pregnancy, I'm going to kill myself. I bought a gun. I went to firing range, right? Because I want to shoot. They have to understand about the recoil.
I can't say that I've really been made aware ever of somebody who bought a gun or obtained a gun to commit suicide that went to the shooting range and practice. Here's the thing from the aspect of an interview. Sometimes a lie is more powerful than the truth.
We just had to let her keep talking because the more that she does that, the worse it is for her.
So I started drinking, and I had a gun. I bought a gun. But now I'm
No, you're on the right track. You're on the right track.
I was really nervous at that point.
Generally, there is only one time that person's going to sit across from us. This is basically your one chance.
So he got home, and I said to him, forget it. I'm not going to have an abortion. And he grabbed me. He threw me on bed, and he grabbed my throat. I just defended myself. He was very angry, and I already had this plan to commit suicide. He said, that's a very good idea, but just do me a favor. Go to the basement to do that, because you're going to splash my paintings. You're going to splash blood all over my paintings.
I mean, basically, he just told you that his paintings are more important than you.
Yeah.
So you're pissed.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, what happened next, the guy got very angry, and I got up real fast and I shot.
Shot what?
I shot at him, and I was lying down.
Come back over here, please. Please.
Yeah, I was going. I got up real fast, and I shot at him. He wasn't too far away. My plan was never, not for 1 single minute, to kill anybody but myself. Swear to God, there was not for a single minute I thought about it.
It was relief. She confessed to shooting him. Now Mike could ask the tough questions.
You were pregnant. What happened with that child?
I lost the baby in Brazil.
You lost the baby in Brazil. Did you go to a hospital there or a doctor?
No, because I was afraid to give my name and be arrested. I was paranoid for that.
We did not believe her. We were never able to find any information to substantiate Claudia's claims of being pregnant.
After you shoot him, and you get your wits about you and you realize what just happened, did you ever think about just calling the police?
Yes, I did, and I was. But my father said not because of the death penalty.
I guess probably the simplest question that we didn't ask. Instead of killing him, would it have been easier to just get a divorce?
I tried, he wouldn't let me.
And what was his story? What was his answer?
I love you. I beg you, won't change. I love you. I love you. I can live with you, most beautiful woman in the world. I love you. I swear I'm going to change.
I was sitting there thinking, how could anybody believe this? Right from the beginning, it felt like theatrics. I think her narcissism overshadowed her intelligence and common sense, and that when she walked out of that room, that she probably felt like a winner.
My personal belief is I think she wasn't real pleased that he had rejected her. He wanted to get divorced from her. I don't think she was used to that, and I think she was vindictive.
We, the jury in this case, duly impaneled and sworn or affirmed, find the defendant, Claudia C. Herrick, guilty of aggravated murder as she stands charged in the first count of the indictment, dated this date, signed by all 12 jurors.
Claudia was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 28 years because that was actually one of the stipulations to the extradition.
You cannot overestimate the value of interviews and confessions.
I got very angry and I got up real fast and shocked.
It's instrumental to our convictions. The confession brought out her lies, which were contradicted by the evidence, which in my opinion is the best kind of evidence to have.
I was relieved. I don't take cases personally, at all, ever. But this case was so different that I was happy to see some closure for the Harry family.
The impact on my family was pretty big for that 11 years. Takes a lot out of you. It was a huge relief to finally get her convicted.
Tenacity pays off. Had it not been for the tenacity of the family, for the investigators involved, this case never would have come to a successful conclusion.
Justice is a journey. It doesn't end until it's done. We owed one last mission for Carl and his service to this country.
It was an ordinary Monday morning in Austin, Texas. August 1st, 1966, began much like countless summer mornings before it. The campus of the University of Texas was alive with quiet routine. Students crossed familiar walkways carrying notebooks and textbooks. Professors prepared lectures for the coming semester. Office employees unlocked doors and settled behind their desks. Visitors climbed the iconic main building tower to admire the sweeping view of the city below. Above them all stood the university's limestone tower, rising more than 200 feet into the Texas sky, a landmark that had long symbolized academic achievement and civic pride. For decades, it had watched over Austin in silence. No one looking up at the tower that morning could have imagined that within minutes it would become the center of one of the darkest days in modern American history. Shortly before noon, strange popping sounds echoed across the campus. At first, few people reacted. Construction projects were common. Firecrackers were not unheard of. Some students paused briefly before continuing on their way. Then someone collapsed. Moments later, another person fell. Within seconds, confusion turned into terror. People began looking around frantically, unable to understand what they were seeing. There was no visible attacker. There were no warning signs. The danger seemed to come from nowhere. Hidden high above the campus, 70 meters above the ground, a lone gunman had transformed one of the university's most recognizable landmarks into a sniper's nest. For the next 96 minutes, fear spread through Austin with astonishing speed. Streets emptied as people dove behind cars, crawled beneath concrete barriers, or pressed themselves flat against the ground, desperately hoping not to become the next target. Police officers rushed toward a threat they could barely see. Ambulances struggled to reach the wounded. Ordinary citizens armed with hunting rifles made decisions that few had ever imagined they would face. When the shooting finally ended, lives have been lost, families have been shattered, and America would begin to rethink how law enforcement responded to mass violence. The University of Texas Tower shooting would become one of the first modern mass shootings in the United States, influencing policing, emergency response, criminology, and public debate for decades to come. Yet understanding what happened on that August morning requires looking beyond the tower itself. It requires stepping backward into the life of the man who climbed to its observation deck carrying a trunk filled with weapons. It requires examining a history marked by extraordinary intelligence, military discipline, personal struggles, deteriorating mental health, and a series of decisions that culminated in irreversible tragedy. Charles Joseph Whitman was born on June 24, 1941, in Lake Worth, Florida. From an early age, he appeared destined for remarkable success. His intelligence was evident almost immediately. Reports placed his IQ between 138 and 139, well above average. By the age of 6, he was already reading books intended for students many years older. Adults who met him often described him as polite, articulate, and exceptionally bright. At 12 years old, Whitman earned the rank of Eagle Scout, becoming one of the youngest Americans to achieve that distinction at the time. The accomplishment reflected not only intelligence, but also discipline, determination, and the ability to master demanding skills. On paper, his future seemed almost limitless. Yet behind those achievements lay a family environment far more complicated than outsiders could see. Whitman's father, Charles Adolph Whitman, was a successful businessman who maintained strict control over his household. According to the information later gathered about the family, he was also physically abusive toward his wife and children. Discipline inside the Whitman home was severe. Mistakes were not tolerated. Obedience was expected. Fear became part of everyday life. Among the lessons Charles Whitman learned from his father was the use of firearms. From a young age, he received extensive shooting instruction. What began as childhood training gradually developed into extraordinary marksmanship. He became capable of handling rifles with remarkable accuracy, a skill that would later earn praise during his military service. At the time, however, few would have viewed those abilities as anything unusual. Firearm training was common in many American households, particularly in families interested in hunting or outdoor sports. As Charles matured, his combination of intelligence and shooting ability seemed to reinforce the image of a disciplined young man with exceptional potential. In 1959, at 18 years old, Whitman enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. Military life suited many of his strengths. His discipline, concentration, and marksmanship quickly distinguished him from many of his peers. He earned recognition as a skilled marksman and later received advanced firearms training, further refining his ability to shoot accurately at long distances. His performance impressed his superiors enough that he was awarded a military scholarship to attend the University of Texas. For a young man from Florida, it represented an opportunity to build a promising future through higher education while continuing to serve his country. The scholarship opened doors that many young Americans could only hope for. Austin offered the excitement of university life, academic opportunity, and the possibility of a professional career beyond the military. Yet the transition proved far more difficult than expected. College life introduced freedoms and pressures very different from the structured environment of the Marines. Over time, Whitman's academic performance declined. He began drinking heavily. Gambling became another problem. His grades suffered. Violations of military expectations eventually resulted in the loss of his scholarship. The setback represented a significant turning point. After losing the scholarship, Whitman returned to military service before eventually receiving his discharge in 1964. Although he had demonstrated remarkable capability as a Marine, The promise that once seemed so clear had begun to unravel. After leaving active military service, Whitman returned to civilian life and married Kathleen Frances Leisner. Friends described their relationship as affectionate and supportive. Kathleen worked as a schoolteacher, while Whitman took on various jobs, including work as a bank employee, a bill collector, and other temporary positions, while continuing his architectural studies. Outwardly, they appear to be an ordinary young couple attempting to build a future together. Like many newly married couples, however, they face financial pressure. Money remained a constant source of stress. Balancing employment with education created ongoing uncertainty. Despite those challenges, nothing visible to friends or neighbors suggested the unimaginable violence that would later unfold. Beneath the surface, however, Charles Whitman was changing. During the early months of 1966, those changes became increasingly difficult for him to ignore. He began suffering severe headaches. Sleep became difficult. Irritability replaced the calm demeanor many had once known. He experienced episodes of uncontrolled anger and, perhaps most disturbingly, recurring violent thoughts that he himself struggled to understand. According to his own writings, Whitman repeatedly questioned why such ideas entered his mind. He described himself as being overwhelmed by impulses that seemed irrational and frightening. Rather than hiding these concerns completely, he sought professional help. On March 29, 1966, Whitman met with university psychiatrist Dr. Maurice Dean Heatley. During that appointment, he disclosed something deeply alarming. He admitted that he had been consumed by thoughts of using a rifle to shoot people from the observation deck of the university tower. It was not a vague expression of anger. It was a specific violent fantasy connected to a specific location. Yet after the meeting, no substantial intervention followed. Whitman returned to his daily life, carrying the same thoughts that had brought him into the psychiatrist's office. Over the following months, those thoughts did not disappear. Instead, according to his journals, they grew increasingly difficult for him to comprehend or control. Near the end of July 1966, Whitman began preparing his affairs with unusual care. He organized personal belongings. He arranged financial matters. He paid outstanding bills. He wrote letters to family members. In one journal entry, he expressed profound confusion about his own state of mind, writing that he did not understand what was happening to him and that he seemed to be the victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. He also made one final request. After his death, he wanted doctors to examine his brain in hopes of discovering whether a physical cause might explain the disturbing changes he had experienced. Those words would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the entire investigation. At the time they were written, however, no one except Whitman knew how little time remained before his carefully ordered life and the lives of countless strangers would collide in a tragedy that history would never forget. As July drew to a close, Charles Whitman appeared increasingly focused on putting his affairs in order. To anyone observing him from the outside, there were few obvious signs that he was approaching a point of no return. He continued moving through familiar routines, interacting with people in ways that did not immediately raise suspicion. Yet privately, his actions suggested that he believed his life was nearing its end. He organized his personal possessions, settled financial obligations, and wrote a series of letters intended to be found after his death. These preparations were methodical rather than impulsive. They reflected someone who expected that the events he was about to set in motion would leave no possibility of returning to ordinary life. In his writings, Whitman again described the confusion that had consumed him for months. He admitted that he no longer understood his own thoughts and expressed concern that something inside him had fundamentally changed. Most notably, he requested that doctors perform an examination of his brain after his death, believing there might be a physical explanation for the disturbing impulses he had experienced. Whether that request came from fear, desperation, or a genuine attempt to understand himself remains a matter of historical discussion. What is clear is that Whitman himself believed something was profoundly wrong. Just after midnight on August 1st, 1966, the first stage of his plan began. Around 12:30 a.m., Whitman drove to the apartment where his mother, Margaret Whitman, had recently begun living following her divorce from Charles Adolph Whitman. The separation had ended years of abuse within the family home, and Margaret was now living alone. According to the available information, Whitman spent time with her after arriving. They talked together before she eventually went to bed. At some point after she had fallen asleep, Whitman attacked her. He used a knife, stabbing her multiple times. To ensure she was dead, he then shot her. Afterward, he covered her body with a blanket. The violence of the act stood in stark contrast to the words he left behind. In the letter written beside his mother's body, Whitman expressed love for her and apologized for what he had done. He wrote that if there were any reasonable explanation for his actions, he did not know what it was. He added that he simply wanted to spare her from further suffering. Those statements have been examined repeatedly over the decades, not because they excuse the crime, but because they illustrate the profound contradiction between Whitman's expressions of affection and the irreversible violence he had committed. Sometime later, Whitman returned to the home he shared with his wife, Kathleen Frances Whitman. It was approximately 3 o'clock in the morning. Kathleen was asleep. Like his mother, she had no opportunity to defend herself. Whitman attacked her with a knife before shooting her. Once again, he wrote a letter after the killing. This second note echoed many of the same themes as the first. He described Kathleen as a wonderful wife and explained that he did not want her to experience what he referred to as the shame of the events he believed were about to unfold. The language in the letter reflected his own reasoning, but it did not lessen the tragedy of what had happened. Within only a few hours, 2 innocent people had been murdered by someone they trusted completely. Their deaths remained undiscovered while the day outside slowly began. Morning arrived over Austin without any indication of the violence that had already taken place. As sunlight spread across the city, Whitman turned his attention toward the next phase of his preparations. Around 6:30 a.m., he began assembling an extraordinary collection of equipment. His preparation was deliberate and extensive. He gathered multiple rifles, a shotgun, handguns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, a hunting knife, food, water, rope, a first aid kit, binoculars, a rifle scope, gun cleaning equipment, and other supplies. Altogether, he packed approximately 700 rounds of ammunition. Everything was loaded into a large trunk mounted on a wheeled hand truck, allowing him to transport the heavy equipment more easily. The assortment of supplies suggested that Whitman anticipated remaining in one location for an extended period. Alongside the weapons were practical items intended to sustain him, indicating that he had planned the logistics of the attack with considerable care. Before heading toward the university, Whitman made additional stops. During the morning, he visited stores where he purchased another shotgun, additional ammunition, knives, and extra magazines. The purchases were substantial, yet they attracted little concern. When asked why he needed so much equipment, Whitman calmly replied that he was going hunting for hogs. In Texas during the 1960s, such an explanation was not necessarily unusual. Hunting was common, and purchasing firearms or ammunition did not automatically invite suspicion. Store employees accepted the explanation, completed the transactions, and Whitman continued on his way. Looking back, historians have often noted how ordinary these interactions appeared. There was no dramatic confrontation, no alarm raised, and no indication that the man making these purchases intended to commit one of the most notorious crimes in American history. As the morning progressed, Whitman changed into work clothes resembling those worn by maintenance employees. The clothing was practical and inconspicuous, helping him blend into the normal activity surrounding the university campus. With a large wheeled trunk carrying his weapons and supplies, he drove toward the University of Texas, the same institution where he had once studied under a military scholarship and where, only months earlier, he had disclosed violent thoughts to a psychiatrist. By approximately 11:25 a.m., Whitman arrived at the main building. Students, faculty members, office workers, visitors, and tourists continued moving through the campus as they always had. Summer classes were still underway, and the grounds remained active despite the season. People passed one another without concern, exchanging greetings or focusing on their own routines. Among them, Whitman pushed the heavy trunk across the campus toward the tower entrance. Nothing about his appearance immediately suggested danger. He looked like someone transporting equipment for maintenance work. At one point, an employee noticed him handling the large load and asked whether he needed assistance. Whitman politely declined, replying with a calm smile that he could manage by himself. The brief conversation lasted only moments. It would later become one of many seemingly insignificant encounters examined after the tragedy, illustrating how close ordinary people had come to recognizing something unusual without having any reason to believe they were witnessing the final preparations for mass murder. Whitman entered the building and loaded the trunk into the elevator. He rode to the 27th floor before dragging the heavy equipment up the remaining stairs, too. The observation deck on the 28th level. The tower's observation area had long been a destination for visitors seeking panoramic views of Austin. On that morning, employees continued their normal duties while tourists admired the skyline. The atmosphere remained peaceful. Waiting near the observation area was Edna Townsley, the receptionist responsible for the deck. Her job was routine, involving visitors arriving and departing throughout the day. When Whitman encountered her, he attacked without warning. He struck her with the butt of his rifle before shooting her, ensuring that she would be unable to alert anyone below. She became the first victim inside the tower. The attack took place quietly enough that those elsewhere in the building remained unaware of what had happened. Only moments later, another group approached the observation deck. They were visitors climbing the stairs, expecting nothing more than a view across the city. Instead, they encountered Whitman armed with a shotgun. He opened fire. Some victims died immediately, while others suffered severe injuries. These killings occurred before the shooting directed toward the campus below had even begun. Inside the tower, violence had already taken hold. Outside, however, the university continued operating normally. Students walked beneath the tower unaware that multiple people had already been killed just overhead. Office windows remained open to the summer air. Cars moved through nearby streets. Conversations continued across sidewalks and classrooms. At approximately 11:48 a.m., Charles Whitman stepped onto the observation deck carrying his rifle. From a height of roughly 70 meters, he could see across nearly the entire university campus and much of the surrounding city. The architectural design of the tower unintentionally provided him with effective firing positions. Drain openings built into the stone parapet allowed him to rest his rifle while remaining partially concealed from anyone below. Combined with the marksmanship skills he had developed over years of firearms training and military service, the location gave him a devastating tactical advantage. Within seconds, one ordinary summer morning would become a scene of confusion and terror unlike anything the University of Texas, or much of America, had ever experienced. At approximately 11:48 a.m., Charles Whitman stepped fully onto the observation deck and positioned himself behind the stone parapet that surrounded the tower. From nearly 70 meters above the campus, he had an unobstructed view in almost every direction. The main building had always been designed as a place of perspective, allowing visitors to admire the city of Austin stretching toward the horizon. On that morning, however, the same elevation gave Whitman something far more dangerous: the ability to observe hundreds of unsuspecting people moving through open spaces below while remaining difficult to identify from the ground. The drain openings built into the parapet served as convenient firing ports, allowing him to steady his rifle while exposing only a small portion of himself. Combined with the marksmanship skills he had developed through years of military training, the tower became an extraordinarily effective position from which to fire. Below him, campus life continued without interruption. Students crossed sidewalks carrying books. Employees walked between buildings. Drivers navigated nearby streets. Visitors admired the historic architecture, unaware that violence had already claimed lives inside the tower only moments earlier. Then the first rifle shots echoed across the university. The sound did not immediately register as gunfire. Several witnesses initially assumed they were hearing construction work somewhere on campus. Others believed someone might be setting off firecrackers. The noises were unexpected, but not immediately alarming. It was only when people began collapsing that confusion turned into fear. One person suddenly fell to the ground. Seconds later, another collapsed. Then another. Those nearby looked around frantically, searching for a threat they could not see. There was no obvious attacker running across the campus. No one stood nearby holding a weapon. The danger seemed invisible. As more shots rang out, panic spread rapidly through the university. Students who had been walking calmly only moments before began running in every direction. Some instinctively dropped flat against the pavement. Others crawled behind trees, concrete planters, parked vehicles, or the walls of nearby buildings. Many had no idea where the bullets were coming from. Looking upward toward the tower was difficult because the shooter remained partially hidden behind the stone openings of the observation deck. Those who did recognize the source of the gunfire often found themselves unable to help others, without exposing themselves to tremendous risk. Whitman continued firing methodically. Unlike a shooter moving through buildings or crowds, he possessed both distance and elevation. Every movement below could be observed through his sights. According to the available information, he fired at nearly anyone who entered his field of vision. His victims included students, professors, university employees, pedestrians, drivers, tourists, and ordinary citizens who happened to be in the surrounding streets. There was no indication that he selected victims based on personal connections. The individuals below represented strangers whose only common characteristic was being visible from the observation deck. One of the most heartbreaking incidents involved 18-year-old Claire Wilson. She was 8 months pregnant and walking across the campus with her boyfriend, Thomas Ekman. Like countless others that morning, neither of them realized they had entered the field of fire. A rifle bullet struck Claire in the abdomen. She immediately collapsed onto the ground. Thomas Ekman rushed toward her, attempting to help without fully understanding where the shots were originating. Before he could reach safety with Claire, Whitman shot him as well. Thomas was killed. Claire remained lying in the open, critically injured, because Whitman continued firing from above, anyone attempting to reach her wrist becoming another victim. She remained trapped for an extended period as bullets continued striking different areas of the campus. Claire ultimately survived her injuries, but her unborn child did not. Her experience became one of the most enduring symbols of the human cost of that morning, illustrating how a single act of violence rippled outward to affect countless lives beyond those immediately killed. Across the university grounds, similar scenes unfolded. People desperately searched for cover wherever they could find it. Some hid beneath parked cars despite knowing the thin metal offered little real protection. Others pressed themselves against concrete walls or crawled behind landscaping features. Those caught in wide, open spaces often attempted to run in unpredictable patterns, hoping movement would make them more difficult targets. Fear spread not only through the campus but also into the surrounding city. Nearby streets slowed to a standstill as drivers abandoned vehicles or crouched behind them after, realizing bullets were reaching areas well beyond university property. Austin had never experienced anything comparable. The uncertainty made the situation even more terrifying. Because the shooter was elevated and difficult to locate, many people did not know which direction represented safety. Every open sidewalk seemed dangerous. Every intersection exposed another possible line of fire. As victims accumulated across the campus, emergency medical assistance faced enormous obstacles. Ambulances could not simply drive directly to every injured person. In many locations, reaching victims meant exposing medical personnel to the same gunfire that had already struck students and civilians. Some wounded individuals remained on the ground for extended periods because rescuers could not safely approach while Whitman continued firing from above. Every attempted rescue required difficult judgments about balancing immediate medical need against the risk of creating additional casualties. Meanwhile, Whitman continued adjusting his position around the observation deck. Rather than remaining fixed behind a single opening, he moved from one firing point to another, making it more difficult for anyone below to determine exactly where he would appear next. His military firearms training allowed him to engage targets at considerable distance with alarming accuracy. The tower's height magnified that advantage. From his elevated position, streets, sidewalks, lawns, and open gathering areas all became visible through his scope. As news spread throughout Austin, more people realized that the city was facing an unprecedented emergency. Law enforcement officers rushed toward the university from different directions, but even they initially struggled to determine how best to respond. In 1966, American police departments had no established doctrine for confronting what would later become known as an active shooter. Specialized tactical units, such as SWAT, had not yet been created. Most patrol officers carried only service pistols or shotguns, weapons poorly suited for engaging a rifleman positioned high above the ground. Officers arriving near the campus quickly recognized that firing accurately toward the observation deck from street level would be extremely difficult. Yet simply waiting was equally unacceptable, as Whitman continued shooting innocent people. During this period, an unusual aspect of the response began to emerge. According to the available information, several private citizens who owned hunting rifles voluntarily brought their firearms to the area surrounding the university, positioning themselves where they believed they might have a view of the tower. They fired back toward Whitman's position whenever possible. None succeeded in striking him, but their return fire had an important effect. Whitman was repeatedly forced to lower himself behind the stone parapet or change positions to avoid incoming bullets. Historians have noted that this likely reduced his opportunities to fire continuously at people below, potentially preventing additional casualties while law enforcement organized a response. Even so, the exchange remained heavily one-sided. Whitman's elevated location continued to provide substantial protection, while those below struggled to identify him through the tower's narrow openings. Throughout the city, ordinary life had effectively stopped. Roads near the university became clogged or deserted. Businesses monitored unfolding events with growing disbelief. Families anxiously searched for information about loved ones who might be on campus. Rumors spread rapidly because reliable information remained scarce. Every passing minute increased uncertainty. No one knew exactly how many victims there were, how many shooters might be involved, or how much longer the attack would continue. Inside the main building itself, another struggle was beginning. While Whitman maintained his position on the observation deck, police officers started organizing teams to enter the tower. Rather than confronting him from outside, they would have to climb floor by floor through the building, never knowing whether the gunman might be waiting around the next corner. Each staircase brought them closer to the source of the gunfire, but also closer to the greatest danger. Above them, Whitman remained armed with multiple weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The outcome of that confrontation was still uncertain, and with every passing minute, more lives remained at risk, while the campus below remained trapped in confusion and fear. The effort to stop Charles Whitman was slowly taking shape inside the University of Texas main building. Officers arriving at the scene immediately faced a problem unlike anything most of them had ever encountered. They knew innocent people were being shot from the tower, but reaching the gunman would require climbing toward an elevated position occupied by a highly trained marksman. Every minute spent outside meant more opportunities for Whitman to continue firing. Every attempt to move through the building carried the possibility of walking directly into another deadly ambush. In 1966, there were no specialized tactical teams trained specifically for active shooter situations. The concept that police officers should immediately move toward an ongoing attack had not yet become standard practice. Patrol officers were forced to improvise using the equipment and training available to them. Most carried only service revolvers or shotguns, weapons with far less range than the rifles Whitman had brought to the observation deck. Even so, waiting for better resources was not an option. As reports of additional victims continued arriving, officers recognized that someone had to reach the top of the tower as quickly as possible. While police began organizing their approach, Whitman continued firing from above. He remained behind the stone parapet, periodically shifting between different firing positions. The drain openings built into the structure allowed him to expose only a small portion of his body, while maintaining clear lines of sight toward the campus below. Whenever return fire came from the ground, he simply lowered himself behind the stone barrier before emerging again from another position. His movements demonstrated the practical advantage provided by his military firearms training. He understood the importance of minimizing his exposure while maintaining the initiative. Down below, armed citizens continued joining police officers in firing toward the observation deck. Texas had long possessed a strong culture of hunting and firearm ownership, and several civilians brought hunting rifles after learning that a sniper was attacking people from the tower. None of them managed to strike Whitman, but their presence created additional pressure. Instead of firing without interruption, Whitman was repeatedly forced to interrupt his shooting to avoid incoming rounds. Each moment spent taking cover represented another brief opportunity for people below to move, seek shelter, or assist the wounded. Although historians cannot determine exactly how many lives may have been spared because of this return fire, it remains one of the more unusual aspects of the day's events. Ordinary citizens, acting independently alongside responding officers, attempted to limit the gunman's ability to continue shooting until police could reach him directly. Meanwhile, inside the tower, officers began ascending through the building. They divided into groups and moved upward using stairways, carefully advancing toward the observation level. The atmosphere inside the building contrasted sharply with the chaos outside. Instead of open spaces filled with panicked crowds, officers encountered long corridors, stairwells, and enclosed passageways where every turn demanded caution. They knew Whitman had already killed people inside the tower before beginning to fire on campus. There was no guarantee he had remained outside on the observation deck. He could have been waiting behind any doorway or around any corner. The uncertainty increased the danger of every step upward. Among those making the climb were Austin Police Officer Ramiro Ray Martinez, Officer Houston McCoy, and Alan Crum, an employee of a university bookstore who voluntarily assisted law enforcement during the emergency. Their decision to continue upward reflected the reality of the situation. There was no alternative route to ending the attack except reaching Whitman himself. While they advanced through the building, gunfire continued echoing overhead. Every shot reminded them that additional victims could be falling outside. Time had become the most critical factor. As the group approached the upper levels, they moved cautiously through increasingly confined spaces leading toward the observation deck. Whitman's exact position remained uncertain. The officers understood that he possessed multiple firearms and substantial quantities of ammunition. If he detected them before they reached the observation area, he could potentially use the narrow access points to his advantage. The possibility of a prolonged gun battle inside the tower remained very real. Nevertheless, Martinez, McCoy, and Crum continued forward. Outside, nearly an hour and a half had passed since the first shots rang out across campus. For those hiding behind walls, beneath vehicles, or inside nearby buildings, the passage of time seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Many had no reliable information about what was happening inside the tower. Some remained pinned down because crossing open ground still carried enormous risk. Others waited anxiously for news about friends, classmates, co-workers, or family members who had been somewhere on campus when the shooting began. Emergency personnel continued treating the wounded whenever opportunities arose. But some victims had remained exposed for extended periods because rescuers could not safely reach them, while Whitman maintained his elevated firing position. Throughout the ordeal, Austin itself had effectively come to a standstill. Roads near the university were disrupted as police established control over the surrounding area. The normally active campus had transformed into a landscape defined by silence interrupted only by distant rifle fire and the movement of emergency responders. The psychological impact extended far beyond those directly involved. Residents across the city found themselves listening for updates while struggling to understand how such violence could unfold in the middle of an ordinary weekday. The image of the university tower, once associated with education and civic pride, had become inseparable from the unfolding tragedy. At approximately 1:20 p.m., Martinez, McCoy, and Crum reached the observation level. The final confrontation unfolded rapidly. According to the available information, Martinez moved aggressively, surprising Whitman from behind. Before Whitman could fully react, Martinez fired his pistol. Almost simultaneously, Officer Houston McCoy discharged his shotgun at close range. The combination of their gunfire immediately ended Whitman's ability to continue the attack. At approximately 1:24 p.m., Charles Joseph Whitman was confirmed dead on the observation deck. The shooting that had begun at 11:48 a.m. was finally over. Roughly 96 minutes had passed since the first rifle shots shattered the routine of an ordinary Monday morning. As officers secured the observation deck, the immediate danger to the campus ended. But the full scale of the tragedy was only beginning to emerge. Across the university grounds and surrounding streets, investigators and emergency responders worked to identify victims, assist survivors, and reconstruct the sequence of events. In total, 18 people, including Whitman himself, ultimately lost their lives, according to the later accounting reflected in the historical record, while 31 others suffered injuries. Earlier historical sources sometimes listed slightly different fatality totals because some victims died from their injuries after the initial event. But the lasting human cost remained profound regardless of the exact figures used in earlier reports. Families across Texas and beyond would soon receive devastating news. Some learned that loved ones had been killed while simply walking across campus. Others discovered that relatives had survived with serious injuries that would permanently alter their lives. For Claire Wilson, survival came with unimaginable loss. Although she lived through the attack, her unborn child did not. Her story became one of the clearest reminders that the consequences of violence extend far beyond Immediate casualty numbers. Behind every statistic stood an individual life interrupted, a family forever changed, and a future that would never unfold as expected. Inside the tower, investigators also discovered the bodies of the first victims killed before the shooting began outside. Receptionist Edna Townsley had been murdered after attempting to carry out her ordinary responsibilities. Visitors who had climbed toward the observation deck, expecting only to enjoy the view, had instead become some of the earliest casualties of Whitman's attack. Their deaths illustrated that the violence had already begun before anyone on the campus below realized danger existed. As officers completed their search of the observation deck and surrounding areas, attention gradually shifted toward understanding who Charles Whitman was, why he had committed such extraordinary violence, and whether any warning signs had been overlooked. The answers would require investigators to retrace his final movements from the previous night, examine the letters he had left behind, and uncover the 2 murders committed hours before he ever entered the university tower. Only then would the full scope of the tragedy become clear, revealing that the massacre on campus had not been an isolated outburst, but the final stage of a carefully prepared sequence of events that had begun long before the first shot echoed across the University of Texas. With the observation deck secured and Charles Whitman confirmed dead, the immediate threat to the University of Texas campus had ended. Yet for investigators, emergency personnel, and the families of those affected, the work was only beginning. The scene inside the tower was unlike anything Austin law enforcement had previously encountered. Multiple firearms lay scattered near Whitman's final position alongside hundreds of rounds of ammunition and the extensive collection of equipment he had transported into the building earlier. That morning, rifles, a shotgun, handguns, ammunition, food, water, rope, binoculars, a first aid kit, a rifle scope, and gun cleaning supplies all remained where they had been placed or discarded during the attack. The carefully assembled equipment confirmed that Whitman had arrived prepared for a prolonged confrontation rather than a brief act of violence. Every item reflected planning. Nothing suggested that the massacre had been spontaneous. Investigators immediately began documenting the observation deck, preserving evidence, and reconstructing the sequence of events that had unfolded over the previous 96 minutes. At the same time, officers continued searching the remainder of the tower to ensure no additional threats remained. As this process unfolded, another task demanded equal urgency: identifying who Charles Whitman was and determining whether he had acted alone. The attack had appeared highly organized, raising understandable concerns that accomplices might exist or that additional attacks could be planned elsewhere. Detectives, therefore, began tracing Whitman's activities during the previous 24 hours. Their investigation quickly led them away from the university and toward 2 locations that would reveal an even more disturbing picture of what had occurred before the shooting ever began. Officers first went to the apartment of Whitman's mother, Margaret Whitman. She had recently divorced Charles Adolph Whitman after years of domestic abuse and had been living independently. Upon entering the residence, investigators discovered her body. She had been stabbed multiple times while asleep before being shot. A blanket had been placed over her remains. Nearby, officers found the handwritten letter Whitman had left behind. In it, he expressed love for his mother and apologized for killing her. He admitted that he did not understand why he had committed the act and wrote that he believed he was sparing her from future suffering. The letter immediately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. It did not explain the murders in any rational sense, but it offered investigators a direct glimpse into Whitman's state of mind during the hours preceding the massacre. From there, detectives proceeded to the home Whitman shared with his wife, Kathleen Frances Whitman. There they encountered another devastating scene. Kathleen had also been killed while asleep. Like his mother, she had been attacked with a knife before being shot. Another handwritten letter rested nearby. In this note, Whitman described Kathleen as a wonderful wife and wrote that he did not want her to experience what he believed would be the shame associated with the crimes he intended to commit later that day. As with the first letter, investigators viewed the document not as a justification, but as evidence of Whitman's thinking during his final hours. Together, the murders of Margaret and Kathleen established that the attack on the university was only one part of a much broader sequence of carefully planned violence. Long before the first shot echoed from the tower, 3 families had already begun suffering irreversible loss. Detectives next turned their attention to Whitman's personal writings and the preparations he had made before August 1st. They learned that in the days leading up to the attack, Whitman had organized his personal affairs with unusual precision. He had written letters, arranged financial matters, paid outstanding bills, and left instructions concerning his belongings. These actions reinforced the conclusion that he expected to die during or after the attack. One request, however, stood apart from everything else he had written. Whitman specifically asked that doctors examine his brain after his death because he believed there might be a physical explanation for the disturbing mental changes he had experienced. This request was especially striking because it aligned with concerns he had previously expressed. While alive, earlier in the year, Whitman had sought psychiatric help after experiencing severe headaches, insomnia, increasing anger, depression, and recurring violent thoughts that he could not explain. During his appointment with university psychiatrist Dr. Maurice Dean Heatley on March 29, 1966, Whitman had openly admitted that he had been imagining using a rifle to shoot people from the university tower. The statement was remarkably specific, describing both the method and the location that would later define the tragedy. Despite the seriousness of what Whitman disclosed, the available information indicates that no substantial intervention or continuing supervision followed that meeting. In the aftermath of the massacre, this appointment became one of the most closely examined aspects of the investigation. It raised difficult questions about how mental health warnings should be evaluated and what forms of intervention might be appropriate when an individual expresses violent fantasies. Those questions would continue influencing discussions among mental health professionals, law enforcement agencies, and policymakers for decades. Honoring Whitman's final request, medical examiners conducted an autopsy that included a careful examination of his brain. During the procedure, doctors discovered a small tumor located near the amygdala, a region associated with emotional regulation and behavioral control. The finding immediately attracted widespread attention. Some physicians believed the tumor could have influenced Whitman's emotional stability or contributed to his aggressive impulses. Others urged caution, emphasizing that no direct scientific conclusion could establish the tumor as the cause of the murders. Over time, researchers continued debating its possible significance. The historical record has never produced a consensus. While the tumor remains one of the most discussed medical findings associated with the case, experts generally agree that no single explanation fully accounts for Whitman's actions. Instead, the available evidence suggests a complex combination of factors, including his deteriorating mental health, severe headaches, history of family abuse, emotional distress, financial pressures, and possible biological influences. None of these factors excuses the crimes, nor do they eliminate Whitman's responsibility for the decisions he made. Rather, they illustrate how investigators struggled and continue to struggle to understand violence that appears to emerge from multiple interacting causes rather than one simple answer. Beyond the investigation into Whitman's background, authorities also face the enormous task of documenting the experiences of survivors and reconstructing the events across the campus. Witness statements revealed the extraordinary confusion that characterized the first moments of the attack. Many people had mistaken the rifle shots for construction noise or fireworks. Others had seen victims collapse without realizing a sniper was firing from above. As investigators compared testimony from students, faculty members, staff, police officers, emergency personnel, and civilians, a clearer timeline gradually emerged. It confirmed how rapidly the situation had developed and how difficult it had been for anyone on the ground to identify the source of the danger. The actions of responding officers also received careful review, because specialized tactical units, such as SWAT, did not yet exist in 1966. Patrol officers had been forced to improvise under unprecedented circumstances. Their decision to enter the tower rather than remain outside became a defining moment in the response. Likewise, investigators noted the unusual role played by armed citizens who had fired hunting rifles toward the observation deck. Although none of them struck Whitman, their return fire repeatedly forced him to seek cover, likely reducing his ability to fire continuously into the campus below. These observations would later influence how police departments across the United States evaluated responses to future active shooter incidents. As the investigation concluded, attention gradually shifted toward the broader significance of what had happened on August 1st, 1966. The University of Texas Tower shooting was no longer viewed solely as an isolated criminal case. It had exposed limitations in emergency response, challenged assumptions about public safety, and raised difficult questions about mental health, violence, and prevention. For the victims' families, however, these larger discussions could never replace what had been taken from them. Behind every report, every forensic examination, every policy review, and every academic study remained the lives of innocent people who had simply begun an ordinary Monday morning expecting nothing more than another day at work, at school, or with loved ones. Their stories became the true legacy of the tragedy, ensuring that the events of August 1st, 1966, would be remembered not for the man who stood atop the tower, but for the many lives forever changed beneath it. The investigation into the University of Texas Tower shooting eventually came to an end, but the questions it raised continued long after the physical evidence had been collected and the observation deck had been cleared. Unlike many criminal cases, there would be no trial. Charles Joseph Whitman had been killed during the confrontation on the tower, bringing the immediate threat to an end and eliminating the possibility of courtroom testimony or cross-examination. Instead, investigators, historians, medical experts, law enforcement agencies, and the public were left to piece together an explanation from letters, journal entries, witness accounts, and forensic findings. The result was not a single, definitive answer, but a complex portrait of a tragedy shaped by multiple factors that converged on one devastating morning. As authorities reviewed Whitman's personal writings, they found repeated references to emotional distress and growing confusion about his own thoughts. He had not portrayed himself as someone who fully understood what was happening inside his mind. Instead, he described experiencing unusual and irrational thoughts that frightened even him. His journals reflected an increasing awareness that something had changed. Severe headaches, insomnia, depression, and episodes of uncontrollable anger appeared alongside repeated references to violent impulses that he could neither explain nor eliminate. Particularly significant was his acknowledgement that he had sought professional help months before. The attack. On March 29, 1966, Whitman met with university psychiatrist Dr. Maurice Dean Heatley and disclosed that he had been thinking about using a rifle to shoot people from the university tower. Looking back after the tragedy, this appointment became one of the most scrutinized moments in the entire case. It represented a rare instance in which a future offender had openly described violent fantasies, connected to a specific location before acting upon them. Yet the consultation did not result in sustained treatment, intensive monitoring, or any intervention capable of preventing what later occurred. This aspect of the case has continued to generate discussion among mental health professionals. Rather than suggesting that every violent thought inevitably leads to violence, the case highlighted the challenges of evaluating risk when individuals disclose disturbing ideas without committing an immediate crime. It also underscored the limitations of mental health resources and risk assessment practices available during the mid-1960s. Whitman's request for a post-mortem brain examination further complicated efforts to understand his actions. Unlike many offenders, he explicitly asked investigators to look for a biological explanation after his death. During the autopsy, physicians discovered a small tumor located near the amygdala, an area of the brain involved in emotional processing and behavioral regulation. The discovery immediately attracted widespread attention because it appeared to offer a possible physical factor contributing to Whitman's deteriorating mental state. Some medical experts argued that the tumor might have influenced his ability to regulate aggression or emotion. Others cautioned that no direct scientific evidence established a causal relationship between the tumor and the murders. Over the years, additional examinations and discussions failed to produce unanimous agreement. As reflected in the historical record, experts never reached a consensus that the tumor itself caused the massacre. Instead, many concluded that the tragedy likely resulted from an interaction of multiple influences rather than one isolated medical condition. Whitman's childhood history added another important layer to that discussion. Growing up in a household dominated by an abusive father exposed him to violence from an early age. Physical punishment, emotional control, and constant pressure shaped much of his upbringing. At the same time, his father introduced him to firearms while he was still a child, helping him develop exceptional marksmanship long before adulthood. Later, his military service strengthened those technical skills through advanced training as a marksman. None of these experiences predetermined the crimes he eventually committed, but investigators recognized that they formed part of the broader context surrounding his life. Financial stress and personal difficulties also appeared throughout the investigation. Whitman and his wife Kathleen had faced economic pressures while trying to establish their lives. Together, he had struggled academically after arriving at the University of Texas, lost his military scholarship, returned to active military service, and later attempted to rebuild his civilian life through various jobs while continuing his education. Combined with reports of worsening depression, chronic headaches, sleep problems, and emotional instability, these pressures painted the picture of a man whose life had become increasingly difficult long before August 1st, 1966. Even so, investigators consistently emphasized that understanding those circumstances did not diminish responsibility for the deliberate choices Whitman ultimately made. The murders of his mother and wife, the extensive preparations, the purchase of additional weapons and ammunition, the transportation of supplies to the tower, and the systematic nature of the shooting all demonstrated planning rather than impulsive action. As attention shifted from understanding Whitman toward evaluating the broader consequences of the attack, law enforcement agencies across the United States began carefully reviewing how officers had responded that day. The University of Texas Tower shooting exposed serious weaknesses in existing police procedures. Patrol officers had shown considerable courage by advancing into danger despite limited equipment, and almost no specialized training for such situations. However, the incident also demonstrated that conventional policing methods were poorly suited to responding quickly to a heavily armed sniper engaged in an ongoing attack. Before 1966, many departments focused on containing dangerous situations and waiting for additional resources whenever possible. The events in Austin illustrated the deadly cost that delays could impose when innocent people remained under active fire. In the years that followed, police organizations increasingly developed specialized tactical capabilities designed for high-risk incidents. The tragedy contributed to broader efforts to establish or expand dedicated tactical response units that later became widely known as SWAT teams. Equally important, the shooting influenced the development of response strategies emphasizing the rapid movement of officers toward active threats rather than prolonged perimeter containment. Although these changes evolved over time and drew upon lessons from multiple incidents, the University of Texas Tower shooting remained one of the earliest and most influential examples demonstrating why traditional approaches required reconsideration. Beyond policing, the massacre also became a significant subject within criminology, psychology, psychiatry, and public policy. Researchers examined Whitman's journals, medical history, military background, and family life in an effort to better understand the pathways leading to extreme violence. Mental health professionals debated how threatening statements should be assessed and when intervention might be appropriate. Discussions surrounding firearm policy also intensified, with many observers viewing the attack as evidence of broader societal challenges requiring careful examination. The case therefore extended far beyond criminal investigation, becoming a lasting point of reference in debates about violence prevention, mental health, emergency preparedness, and public safety. Yet amid these broader discussions, the experiences of survivors remained central to the tragedy's legacy. Claire Wilson continued living with the memory of the attack and the loss of her unborn child. Families of those who died faced the lifelong absence of parents, children, spouses, friends, and colleagues. Survivors who suffered physical injuries also carried emotional consequences that could not be measured solely through medical records. Every anniversary served as a reminder that the impact of the shooting extended well beyond the 96 minutes during which Whitman fired from the observation deck. The event became permanently woven into the history of the University of Texas and the city of Austin, not because of the man who committed the crimes, but because of the resilience of those forced to endure them. Today, the University Tower still stands over the Austin campus, recognizable to generations of students who arrive each year with hopes for education and opportunity. Its appearance has changed little since 1966, but its meaning can never be entirely separated from the events of that August morning. The tower remains both an architectural landmark and a place of remembrance, symbolizing how ordinary spaces can become scenes of extraordinary tragedy. The story of a University of Texas Tower shooting endures not because it offers simple explanations or easy conclusions. It illustrates the importance of recognizing warning signs without assuming that every question has an obvious answer. It demonstrates the necessity of preparing emergency responders for situations that once seemed unimaginable. Most importantly, it reminds us that behind every historical statistic are individual lives interrupted without warning, students walking to class, employees beginning another workday, visitors admiring a city skyline, and families whose futures were permanently altered in the span of a single summer morning. More than half a century later, the names and experiences of the victims continue to deserve remembrance, while the lessons drawn from that day continue shaping how communities, researchers, and law enforcement agencies strive to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. More than half a century has passed since August 1st, 1966. Yet the University of Texas Tower shooting continues to occupy a unique place in American history. It was not the first instance of multiple people being killed in a single act of violence, nor was it the last. What distinguished the event was the way it exposed vulnerabilities that few people had previously imagined. A university campus, widely regarded as a place devoted to education, curiosity, and opportunity, suddenly became the setting for a prolonged attack carried out from one of its most recognizable landmarks. The incident demonstrated that violence on a large scale could unfold in broad daylight, in a public place, and before thousands of witnesses, creating consequences that extended far beyond the immediate victims. In the decades that followed, historians would frequently describe the University of Texas Tower shooting as one of the first modern mass shootings in the United States. That description reflected not only the number of casualties, but also the lasting influence the event had on policing, emergency planning, public discussion, and academic research. Before the tragedy, many law enforcement agencies had little experience responding to an armed individual actively attacking strangers over an extended period. The events in Austin challenged long-standing assumptions about how quickly police needed to confront such threats and how officers should organize themselves when lives were still in immediate danger. The courage displayed by the officers who entered the tower became an important part of that history. Ramiro Ray Martinez, Houston McCoy, and Alan Crum advanced toward a gunman who possessed superior elevation, extensive ammunition, and exceptional marksmanship. They climbed the building knowing that each floor brought them closer to someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to kill repeatedly. Their actions ultimately ended the attack after approximately 96 minutes. In later years, their response would be remembered not because it was supported by specialized tactical doctrine, but because it helped inspire the development of better methods for confronting similar emergencies in the future. Many police departments subsequently established or expanded specialized tactical units capable of responding to situations involving heavily armed suspects. Procedures also evolved toward the principle that officers should move rapidly to stop an active shooter rather than waiting for larger response teams whenever innocent lives remained under direct threat. The shooting also left a lasting impact on discussions surrounding mental health. Charles Whitman's case presented investigators with an unsettling combination of warning signs. He experienced severe headaches, depression, insomnia, uncontrollable anger, and violent thoughts that he himself described as abnormal. He sought psychiatric assistance and openly admitted that he had imagined shooting people from the university tower. After his death, physicians discovered a tumor near his amygdala, leading to years of scientific discussion regarding whether biological factors may have contributed to his behavior. Yet despite decades of research, no definitive conclusion emerged. Most experts ultimately viewed the case as the result of multiple interacting influences rather than a single identifiable cause. That complexity continues to shape how professionals approach similar questions today. Cases involving mental illness, neurological conditions, personal history, family violence, and social stress rarely offer simple explanations. The University of Texas Tower shooting remains a reminder that understanding violent behavior requires careful, evidence-based analysis rather than assumptions or oversimplified conclusions. At the same time, the tragedy highlighted the importance of taking expressed threats seriously while recognizing the challenges involved in accurately assessing future risk. These remain difficult issues without universally accepted solutions. But Whitman's case became one of the most frequently studied examples in discussions of threat assessment and violence prevention. For the University of Texas itself, the events of August 1st permanently became part of the institution's history. Students arriving on campus in subsequent generations often encountered the tower first as an architectural landmark, but many also learned about the tragedy associated with it. The building came to symbolize both achievement and remembrance. although ordinary academic life resumed after the attack. Memories of that day continued to influence how the university understood its own history. Every classroom, sidewalk, and courtyard connected to the events of 1966 became part of a larger narrative about resilience in the face of unimaginable violence. Survivors carried that history with them throughout their lives. Some recovered physically while continuing to live with emotional memories that could never be erased. Others faced permanent disabilities resulting from their injuries. Families who lost loved ones experienced anniversaries, birthdays, graduations, holidays, and countless ordinary moments without the people they expected to share them with. Their grief did not end when the shooting stopped. Instead, it became part of daily life, extending across decades. Among the survivors, Claire Wilson's experience remained especially well known. Shot while approximately 8 months pregnant. She survived after remaining exposed on the campus grounds because rescuers risked becoming targets themselves. Her unborn child did not survive. Her story came to represent the profound personal consequences hidden behind casualty statistics. A single rifle bullet altered not only one life, but the future of an entire family. Similar stories unfolded across many other families touched by the attack, even if they received less public attention. Every victim had relationships, ambitions, routines, and plans that ended or changed forever during those 96 minutes. The investigation also reinforced the importance of remembering the earliest victims whose deaths occurred before the public shooting even began. Margaret Whitman and Kathleen Whitman were killed during the early hours of August 1st, long before the campus realized any danger existed. Receptionist Edna Townsley was performing her ordinary duties when she encountered Whitman inside the tower. Visitors who climbed the final staircase expected only to enjoy the panoramic view of Austin, but instead became some of the first casualties of the massacre. Their stories remind us that the tragedy unfolded in stages, beginning quietly during the night before expanding into public catastrophe by late morning. Looking back, it is tempting to search for a single moment when everything could have been prevented. History, however, rarely provides such certainty. Whitman's abusive childhood, military experience, financial pressures, deteriorating mental health, severe headaches, disturbing journal entries, psychiatric consultation, and brain tumor have all been examined extensively. Each represents one piece of a much larger puzzle. None alone fully explains why the tragedy occurred. Understanding this complexity is essential because simplistic explanations risk obscuring the broader lessons that the case continues to teach. The University of Texas Tower shooting ultimately stands as a reminder that prevention depends upon multiple systems working together: mental health awareness, effective law enforcement preparation, careful evaluation of credible threats, and ongoing research into the factors associated with extreme violence. No single measure can guarantee safety, but each lesson learned has contributed to improvements intended to reduce future harm. Perhaps the most important legacy of August 1st, 1966, lies not in the notoriety of Charles Whitman, but in the enduring humanity of those whose lives intersected with his actions. The students who came to campus seeking education, the professors preparing lessons, the staff performing ordinary work, the visitors admiring the skyline, the police officers climbing toward danger, the civilians who attempted to protect strangers by returning fire from below, the emergency personnel who struggled to reach the wounded, and the families forever changed by loss all represent the true story of that day. Their experiences transformed an event recorded in history books into a deeply human tragedy that continues to resonate across generations. Remembering the University of Texas Tower shooting, therefore, requires more than recalling dates, locations, or casualty figures. It requires recognizing the individual lives behind every statistic and acknowledging the lasting consequences that violence leaves upon communities long after the headlines disappear. More than 50 years later, the tower still rises above Austin, visible from across the city, just as it was on that summer morning in 1966. For many, it remains a symbol of education and perseverance. For others, it also serves as a place of remembrance, honoring those who never returned home that day and those who carried its memories for the rest of their lives. Their stories endure as a solemn reminder that history is measured not only by the actions of those who commit terrible crimes, but by the lives of the innocent people whose courage, resilience, and memory deserve to be remembered long after the sound of gunfire has faded. The University of Texas Tower shooting remains one of the most deeply examined tragedies in American criminal history because it represents a moment when the country was forced to confront a form of violence that many had never imagined. The event was not simply a crime committed by one individual. It was a moment that revealed the complex intersection between personal suffering, untreated psychological distress, access to firearms, emergency response limitations, and the vulnerability of public spaces. More than 50 years later, researchers continue studying the case, not because the answers are easy to find, but because the tragedy raises questions that remain relevant long after the final shot was fired. The investigation into Charles Joseph Whitman provided a detailed picture of a man whose life contained both remarkable achievements and disturbing warning signs. From childhood, Whitman was viewed as exceptionally intelligent and disciplined. He achieved a high IQ score, became an Eagle Scout at a young age, and developed impressive skills with firearms. His ability as a marksman was reinforced during his service in the United States Marine Corps, where he received advanced training and earned recognition for his shooting abilities. To many people who knew him casually, Whitman appeared to be responsible, capable, and ambitious. He was a student, a husband, a former Marine, and someone who seemed to possess the qualities associated with success. Yet behind that public image existed a growing internal struggle that became increasingly difficult for him to control. The contrast between Whitman's outward appearance and his private experiences became one of the central themes of the investigation. He was not viewed by many acquaintances as someone who openly displayed constant hostility or obvious danger. Instead, his deterioration occurred gradually, marked by emotional instability, depression, severe headaches, insomnia, anger, and violent thoughts that he himself found disturbing. His personal writings revealed confusion rather than clarity. He described feeling as though he was losing control and questioned why these thoughts were appearing in his mind. This internal conflict makes the case particularly difficult to understand because Whitman appeared to recognize that something was wrong. Yet he continued moving toward an irreversible act of violence. The tragedy also highlighted the importance of examining warning signs without relying on hindsight alone. After the shooting, many people focused on the fact that Whitman had visited a university psychiatrist months earlier and described thoughts of shooting people from the tower. This information became one of the most discussed aspects of the case. However, understanding the significance of such statements remains a complicated challenge. Not every person who experiences disturbing thoughts will commit violence, and not every warning sign can be accurately interpreted before an event occurs. The case demonstrated the difficulty faced by mental health professionals and institutions, attempting to balance individual privacy with public safety. It also contributed to later discussions about threat assessment and the need for more effective systems to identify and respond to credible risks. Another major aspect of the tragedy was the role of planning. The attack was not a sudden explosion of anger that occurred without preparation. Investigators discovered that Whitman had spent significant time organizing his actions. He gathered multiple firearms, approximately 700 rounds of ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, tools, and other equipment. He disguised himself as a maintenance worker, transported his supplies into the tower, and selected a location that provided a commanding view of the surrounding area. He also killed his mother and wife before arriving at the university. These details demonstrated that the massacre was the result of deliberate decisions made over time. This distinction became important in understanding the responsibility involved. Although investigators examined Whitman's mental state and possible medical factors, they also recognized the extensive planning and choices that shaped the outcome. The discovery of the brain tumor near Whitman's amygdala added another layer of complexity to the discussion. For many members of the public, the findings seemed to offer a possible explanation for behavior that appeared impossible to comprehend. However, scientific experts remain cautious. While the amygdala plays a role in emotional processing and regulation, the presence of a tumor does not automatically explain violent behavior. The available evidence did not establish that the tumor directly caused the massacre. Instead, the case became an example of how biological, psychological, and environmental factors may interact in complicated ways. The search for a simple answer continued, but history ultimately showed that no single factor could fully explain the events of August 1st, 1966. The response of law enforcement became another defining element of the tragedy's legacy. At the time of the shooting, police departments were not equipped with the specialized tactical units and active shooter procedures that exist today. Officers responding to the University of Texas faced a situation that had no clear blueprint. They confronted a gunman positioned high above the ground with superior firepower and a protected location. Despite these disadvantages, officers moved toward the danger rather than away from it. Their actions reflected the urgency of the situation. Every moment mattered because people below remained exposed. The eventual development of specialized police tactics was influenced by many incidents over time. But the University Tower shooting became one of the earliest events demonstrating the need for rapid, coordinated responses to heavily armed attackers. The tragedy also changed public understanding of safety in open environments. Universities, workplaces, and public buildings had traditionally been viewed as places where ordinary activities could occur without the expectation of sudden mass violence. The events in Austin challenged that assumption. The tower, once simply an observation point and architectural landmark, became associated with vulnerability and loss. The attack forced communities to consider questions about emergency planning, communication, evacuation procedures, and the protection of public spaces. Yet even as these institutional lessons were developed, the personal stories of the victims remained the most important part of the tragedy. The names behind the casualty numbers represented individuals with families, friendships, ambitions, and futures. They were not simply victims in a historical account. They were people who had been living ordinary lives until an extraordinary act of violence interrupted them. Some were students beginning their adult lives. Some were employees completing their daily responsibilities. Some were visitors who had come to enjoy the view from the tower. Some were simply passing through the wrong place at the wrong moment. Their lives cannot be reduced to statistics. The same is true of the survivors. Physical survival did not mean that the experience ended when the shooting stopped. Many survivors carried memories of fear, confusion, injury, and loss for the rest of their lives. The emotional consequences extended beyond those directly present at the scene, affecting families and communities that continued to process what had happened. The University of Texas Tower shooting became part of a larger national conversation about violence. But for those personally connected to the tragedy, it remained an intensely personal experience. Over time, memorials, historical studies, and public discussions helped preserve the memory of August 1st, 1966. Remembering the event serves multiple purposes. It honors those who died, acknowledges the suffering of survivors, recognizes the courage of those who responded, and preserves the lessons learned from one of the most significant moments in modern American history. However, remembrance must also avoid focusing only on the person responsible. The danger of studying notorious crimes is that attention can sometimes become centered on the offender rather than the people harmed. The lasting story of the University of Texas Tower shooting belongs primarily to the victims, the survivors, and the community that endured the aftermath. Charles Whitman's actions created the tragedy, but they do not define the lives that were lost. Those individuals existed beyond the circumstances of their deaths. They had relationships, dreams, and experiences that mattered. The final legacy of the University of Texas Tower shooting is therefore not only a story about violence, but also a story about response, resilience, and remembrance. It is a reminder that behind every historical event are human beings whose lives deserve recognition. The lessons learned from that day have influenced law enforcement practices, mental health discussions, and emergency preparedness across the country. Yet the most enduring lesson remains the simplest. Every number represents a person. Every person represents a life. And every life lost leaves a lasting impact on the people who remain. The tower still stands above Austin, but its meaning has changed forever. It represents both the darkness of what occurred there and the determination of communities to learn. From tragedy, the University of Texas Tower shooting remains a painful chapter in American history. But by remembering the victims and studying the circumstances that led to the event, society continues the difficult work of understanding violence and seeking ways to prevent future loss. The story of the University of Texas Tower shooting does not end with the death of Charles Joseph Whitman on the observation deck. The final shots fired on August 1st, 1966, ended the immediate danger. But they did not end the questions, the grief, or the lasting consequences created by that morning. For the people who survived, for the families who lost loved ones, for the University of Texas community, and for the broader American public, the aftermath became a long process of understanding an event that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. The tragedy forced society to examine not only what happened inside the tower, but also what could be learned from it. More than 50 years later, the University Tower remains a symbol of both tragedy and transformation, representing a moment when the country's understanding of public violence changed forever. In the days and weeks following the shooting, investigators continued working to establish the complete timeline of Whitman's actions. Although the immediate investigation had revealed the basic sequence of events, authorities continued examining evidence to understand how the attack had developed and whether anything could have been done differently. The discovery of Whitman's letters, personal writings, weapons, and preparations provided a clearer picture of his final hours. Investigators confirmed that the massacre had been carefully planned. The murders of his mother and wife before the attack demonstrated that the violence had begun long before the first shots were fired at the university. The supplies he collected, the weapons he transported, and the disguise he used to enter the tower all indicated deliberate preparation. This understanding was important because it changed how many people viewed the event. It was not simply a moment of sudden emotional collapse. It was the conclusion of a sequence of decisions made over time. For the families of the victims, however, understanding the sequence of events could not undo the devastation they experienced. The official investigations, medical examinations, and public discussions could explain what happened, but they could never restore the lives that had been lost. Parents lost children. Families lost spouses and relatives. Friends lost classmates and companions. Each person killed had existed beyond the moment of tragedy. They had personal histories, relationships, hopes, and plans that were interrupted without warning. The human cost of the shooting extended far beyond the casualty numbers reported in newspapers. Among the survivors, the experience of August first became something they carried throughout their lives. Those who escaped physical injury still faced the psychological impact of witnessing violence on an unimaginable scale. Many had experienced moments of extreme fear without understanding where the danger was coming from. They had watched strangers collapse, seen friends injured, or waited helplessly while rescue efforts were delayed because approaching the wounded could expose others to gunfire. The uncertainty of those 96 minutes left a lasting impression on everyone who experienced it. The story of Claire Wilson remained one of the most remembered examples of the attack's human consequences. She survived being shot while 8 months pregnant, but her unborn child did not survive. Her survival represented both tragedy and resilience. She became one of the individuals whose experiences helped the public understand that the impact of the shooting was not limited to those who died at the scene. Survivors carried physical injuries, emotional trauma, and memories that could not simply disappear after the immediate crisis ended. The University of Texas itself underwent a period of reflection and change. The campus that had once represented academic life and opportunity became permanently connected to a moment of national tragedy. The university community faced the difficult task of continuing daily life while carrying the memory of what had happened. Students returned to classrooms. Faculty resumed teaching. Employees returned to their responsibilities. Yet the environment had changed. The tower, once a place where visitors gathered to admire the view of Austin, now carried a painful historical association. Over time, the university and the surrounding community developed ways to remember the victims while continuing forward. The tragedy also influenced how Americans thought about emergency response. Before 1966, many police departments were not prepared for an individual armed with powerful weapons attacking people from a protected position over an extended period. Officers arriving at the University of Texas had to make decisions without the benefit of modern active shooter training or specialized tactical units. Their response demonstrated both courage and the limitations of the systems available at the time. In the years after the shooting, law enforcement agencies studied the incident carefully. The need for specialized equipment, coordinated tactical responses, and rapid intervention became increasingly recognized. Although the development of modern police response methods resulted from many events over many years, the University Tower shooting became one of the most significant early examples demonstrating the need for change. The tragedy also became an important case study in criminology and psychology. Researchers examined Whitman's background, his writings, his psychiatric consultation, and the medical findings from his autopsy. They attempted to understand how a person who appeared successful in many areas of life could commit such extreme violence. The case challenged simple explanations. Whitman was not defined by a single characteristic. His life included intelligence, discipline, military achievement, personal relationships, emotional struggles, and disturbing thoughts. The complexity of his background demonstrated that acts of extreme violence often emerge from multiple contributing factors rather than one isolated cause. The discovery of the tumor near Whitman's amygdala remained one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation. For some observers, it represented a possible biological factor that might have influenced his behavior. For medical experts, however, the finding required careful interpretation. The presence of a tumor did not prove that it caused the massacre. The relationship between brain abnormalities and violent behavior remained complicated, and experts continued to emphasize that many factors must be considered together. The case, therefore, became an example of the challenges involved in connecting medical findings with human actions. The broader public debate after the shooting also expanded beyond the individual offender. The tragedy raised difficult discussions about firearms, mental health services, public safety, and institutional responsibility. Because Whitman had expressed violent thoughts before the attack, many people questioned whether earlier intervention might have changed the outcome. Others examined the limitations faced by professionals attempting to assess threats before violence occurs. These debates continued for decades because the questions raised by the case remained difficult and relevant. How can warning signs be recognized? How should threats be evaluated? How can communities protect people while respecting individual rights? The University Tower shooting did not provide simple answers, but it forced these questions into public awareness. Perhaps the most important lesson from the tragedy is that remembrance must remain focused on the victims rather than the person who caused the destruction. Criminal cases involving notorious offenders often risk allowing the perpetrator's identity to overshadow the people harmed. In the case of the University of Texas Tower shooting, the lasting significance comes not from Charles Whitman's actions alone, but from the lives affected by them. The students, employees, visitors, emergency responders, and families connected to that day represent the true legacy of the event. Their experiences demonstrate courage, loss, survival, and the ability of communities to continue after unimaginable suffering. Today, the University Tower remains standing above Austin. Generations of students have passed through the campus since 1966, many arriving long after the tragedy occurred. For them, the tower is both a landmark and a reminder of history. It stands as evidence that places can hold memories, both painful and meaningful. The building itself did not create the tragedy, but it became inseparably connected to the stories of those who lived through it. More than 5 decades later, the University of Texas Tower shooting remains one of the most studied and remembered acts of violence in American history. It changed law enforcement practices, influenced discussions about mental health and public safety, and shaped the way society understands mass shootings. But beyond all policies and historical analysis, the deepest meaning of the event remains personal. It is found in the families who continued without loved ones, the survivors who carried memories of that day, and the community that learned how to move forward while honoring those who were lost. The tragedy of August 1st, 1966, serves as a reminder that history is not only made by the actions of those who commit terrible crimes. It is also shaped by the strength of those who survive, the compassion of those who respond, and the responsibility of future generations to remember. The tower still rises over Austin, but the most important legacy of that day is not the height from which violence came. It is the resilience shown by the people below. The University of Texas Tower shooting remains one of the defining moments in the history of American violence, not only because of the number of lives lost, but because of the questions it forced society to confront. More than half a century later, the events of August 1st, 1966, continue to be studied by historians, law enforcement professionals, psychologists, and researchers attempting to understand how such a tragedy could occur and what lessons can be carried forward. Yet the center of all these studies remains a simple truth. The story is ultimately about people. It is about the individuals who lost their lives, those who survived, those who responded under impossible circumstances, and the families who carried the consequences long after the news coverage ended. The legacy of the University of Texas Tower shooting is not defined only by the actions of Charles Joseph Whitman. It is defined by the human impact of that day and the determination to learn from it. When Whitman climbed to the observation deck of the tower on August 1st, 1966, he transformed a place associated with education and achievement into the scene of one of the most shocking acts of violence in American history. From his position approximately 70 meters above the ground, he used his training as a skilled marksman to attack people below. The victims were not connected to him. They were strangers who happened to be present at the wrong moment. Students walking across campus, university employees completing their daily work, visitors exploring the tower, and ordinary people moving through Austin became targets of a tragedy they could never have anticipated. The randomness of the attack became one of its most frightening aspects. There was no warning for those below. There was no clear indication that danger existed until people began falling. Many initially believed the sounds were construction activity or something unrelated. Only when multiple people were injured did the reality become clear. A gunman was firing from above, and the entire area had become dangerous. The confusion and helplessness experienced by those on the ground became one of the defining memories of the event. People searched for shelter wherever they could find it. They hid behind structures, stayed close to the ground, and attempted to protect themselves and others while waiting for the shooting to end. For many victims, survival depended not only on luck, but on the courage of strangers who attempted to help despite the danger. Emergency responders faced the difficult task of providing assistance while knowing they themselves could become targets. The situation revealed the extraordinary challenges created by a gunman positioned in a fortified location with a clear view of the surrounding area. The eventual response by law enforcement became one of the most studied aspects of the incident. Officers who climbed the tower did so without the specialized equipment, training, or tactical systems that are common today. They entered an uncertain and dangerous environment because they understood that every additional minute allowed the attack to continue. The actions of Ramiro Ray Martinez, Houston McCoy, Alan Crum, and other responders demonstrated the importance of courage and decisive action during crisis. Their efforts ended the immediate threat and prevented further casualties. In later years, police departments across the country examined incidents like the University Tower shooting to improve emergency response strategies. The tragedy contributed to a broader transformation in law enforcement thinking. Rather than viewing certain violent situations as events to contain until specialized assistance arrived, agencies increasingly recognized the need for rapid intervention when an attacker remained actively threatening innocent lives. The development of tactical response capabilities, improved training, and new approaches to active shooter incidents were influenced by lessons learned from this and other tragedies. However, changes in policing were only one part of the broader impact. The shooting also changed conversations about mental health and violence prevention. Whitman's case remained difficult to interpret because it contained both clear warning signs and unanswered questions. He had described violent thoughts before the attack. He had sought psychiatric assistance. He had written about feeling unable to understand the changes happening within himself. At the same time, he carefully planned his actions and carried out a deliberate sequence of violence. This combination made the case particularly challenging for researchers. It showed that understanding extreme violence requires examining many elements together rather than searching for one simple explanation. The examination of Whitman's brain after his death became one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation. The discovery of a small tumor near the amygdala attracted significant public attention because it appeared to offer a possible explanation for his behavior. However, experts did not reach agreement that the tumor directly caused the massacre. The scientific understanding of human behavior is complex, and a physical abnormality does not automatically determine a person's actions. Instead, the case demonstrated the difficulty of separating biological factors from psychological experiences, personal history, and environmental influences. The University of Texas Tower shooting also became a reminder of the importance of taking expressions of violence seriously. Whitman's previous statement about imagining shooting people from the tower became a central point of discussion after the tragedy. The case raised questions about how institutions should respond when someone reveals disturbing thoughts or describes violent scenarios. These questions remain challenging because predicting human behavior is never simple. Not everyone who experiences dark thoughts becomes violent, but ignoring credible warning signs can have devastating consequences. The tragedy encouraged continued development of threat assessment methods designed to evaluate situations more carefully and identify individuals who may require intervention. While the broader lessons from the shooting continue to influence policies and research, the personal stories of the victims remain the most important part of the historical record. Statistics can describe the scale of a tragedy, but they cannot describe the lives behind those numbers. Every victim had a personal story that existed before August 1st, 1966. They had families, friendships, responsibilities, and dreams. Their deaths affected people who continued living with their absence for decades. Remembering them requires looking beyond the event itself and recognizing the full humanity of those who were lost. The same principle applies to survivors. Living through the shooting did not mean leaving it behind. Many survivors carried memories of fear and loss throughout their lives. Some suffered physical injuries that changed their futures. Others carried emotional wounds that were invisible but equally significant. Their experiences demonstrated that the impact of mass violence does not end when the attacker is stopped. The consequences continue through survivors, families, and communities. Over time, the University of Texas and the city of Austin worked to preserve the memory of those affected while continuing forward. The tower remained standing, but its meaning evolved. It became a place associated with both tragedy and remembrance. For many people, it represented a painful chapter in history. For others, it represented the importance of resilience and learning. The continued presence of the tower serves as a reminder that communities can endure even after experiencing unimaginable events. Looking back at the University of Texas tower shooting, it is important to resist the temptation to search for a single answer. The tragedy cannot be explained only through mental illness, only through personal history, only through access to weapons, or only through one moment in time. It emerged from a combination of circumstances that came together with devastating consequences. Understanding this complexity does not reduce accountability. Instead, it allows society to study the event more accurately and develop more effective ways to prevent future tragedies. The story of August 1st, 1966, continues because the questions it raised remain important. How can communities recognize danger before it becomes violence? How can mental health concerns be addressed effectively? How can emergency responders be prepared for threats that once seemed unimaginable? These questions do not have easy answers, but the effort to answer them is part of the legacy of those who experienced the tragedy. Ultimately, the University of Texas tower shooting is remembered not because of the height of the tower or the actions of the man who stood on top of it. It is remembered because of the people below, the victims whose lives ended too soon, the survivors who endured, the responders who acted with courage, and the families who continued despite profound loss. The most important lesson from that day is not about the power of violence. It is about the responsibility to remember, to learn, and to value the lives that were changed forever. More than 50 years later, the tower remains above Austin, but the true legacy of August 1st, 1966, exists in the memories of those affected and in the ongoing commitment to prevent such suffering from happening again.